Chapter 1 Barnaby and the Clock of Silence. Close your eyes. Take a long, slow breath in and let it out. Imagine you are floating on a soft, warm cloud. Below you, the world is beginning to dim its lights. But where does the quiet come from? Who turns down the volume of the wind and tells the birds it's time to tuck their heads under their wings? Meet Barnaby. Barnaby is a very small, very round, and very sleepy fellow. If you saw him, you might think he was a ball of silver-gray fluff that had somehow grown a pair of kind golden eyes and a tiny twitching velvet nose. He wears a nightcap that is much too long for him, with a soft bell at the end that doesn't ring. It only hums a low, comforting note when he walks. Barnaby doesn't live in a house like yours or mine. He lives inside the great clock of silence. This clock doesn't tick, it doesn't talk, it breathes. It sits in a hidden valley where the grass is made of soft silk and the flowers only bloom when the moon is full. Inside the clock, the gears are made of polished sandalwood, and they turn so smoothly that they make a sound like a distant cat purring. This is Barnaby's workshop, but it is also his home. Every evening, as the shadows grow long, Barnaby wakes up from his afternoon nap on a bed made of gathered swan feathers. He stretches his short, fluffy arms and puts on his tiny slippers made of dried moss. He has a very important job to do. You see, the world can be a very noisy place. It is full of clatter and chatter and the hum of machines. Barnaby's job is to collect that noise and turn it into something soft. In the center of his room stands a large wooden table. On it sit hundreds of tiny glass jars. Each jar has a label written in swirling silver ink: the sound of a distant train, the rustle of autumn leaves, the whisper of a secret. Barnaby takes a golden key from around his neck and opens the window of the clock tower. He closes his eyes and listens. He hears a car driving far away. He reaches out with a small wooden net, much like a butterfly net but made of invisible threads, and catches the sound. As soon as the sound enters his net, it changes. The roar of the engine turns into the gentle, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping puppy. Barnaby pulls the net back in, carefully pours the sound into a jar, and seals it with a cork. "There now," Barnaby whispers. His voice is like the sound of dry leaves dancing on a sidewalk, crisp, soft, and very, very calm. "Rest now. The day is done, and the night is here to hold you." Barnaby walks over to his fireplace, where a fire made of cool light glows with a soft blue hue. It doesn't burn, it only radiates a gentle warmth that makes you want to curl up under a heavy blanket. He sits in his rocking chair, which is carved from a single piece of driftwood, and begins his nightly ritual. He takes a small silver brush and begins to brush his fur. It's a slow, steady movement. Brush, brush, brush. With every stroke of the brush, a little bit of sleep dust falls from his fur. It looks like tiny diamonds floating in the air. This dust is special. It carries the weight of the stars and the stillness of the deep ocean. When Barnaby is finished, he opens his front door and gently blows the dust out into the night wind. The wind carries it across the hills, through the windows of houses, and into the dreams of everyone who is waiting for rest. Barnaby watches the dust float away, his golden eyes blinking slowly. He feels a pleasant heaviness in his own paws. He looks at the great clock of silence. The gears are turning perfectly. The world is becoming hushed. The stars are leaning a little closer to the earth, as if they too want to hear the silence Barnaby has created. Barnaby watches the dust float away, his golden eyes blinking slowly. But his work for the evening is not quite finished. Before he can settle into his own dreams, he must prepare the night tea for the valley's shadows. He moves to a small copper kettle that sits on the corner of his cool fire hearth. This kettle doesn't boil water, it steeps moonlight. He opens a small wooden drawer and takes out a pinch of star clover and a single leaf of midnight mint. As he drops them into the pot, the room fills with a scent so relaxing it feels like a warm hug for your mind. It smells of old libraries, clean linen, and the air just after a summer rain. He pours the tea into a tiny porcelain cup that is no bigger than a thimble. As he sips, he looks out at his garden. In Barnaby's garden, the plants don't grow toward the sun, they grow toward the stars. There are glow lilies that hum a soft bass note and velvet ferns that sway even when there is no wind. He notices a small blue moth fluttering near the window. The moth looks tired, its wings moving heavily. Barnaby reaches out his paw, and the moth lands gently on his silver fur. "Softly now, little friend," Barnaby murmurs. He gently strokes the moth's wings with the tip of his claw, sharing a bit of his calm energy. The moth settles down, its antennae stopping their frantic twitching. It falls fast asleep right there on Barnaby's shoulder. Barnaby smiles. To him, every creature, no matter how small, deserves a moment of perfect stillness. He then turns to his library of sighs. Along the circular wall of the clock, there are shelves filled with books that have no titles on their spines. These books don't contain stories written in ink, they contain the sighs of the world. When a person finally lets out a deep breath at the end of a long day, that breath travels through the air and finds its way to Barnaby's tower. He catches these sighs and binds them into leather covers. He picks up a book and opens it. A soft, airy sound escapes. Whoosh! It's the sound of a gardener who finally sat down after planting 100 tulip bulbs. Barnaby breathes it in, feeling the gardener's satisfaction and the pleasant ache of a day's work well done. He places the book back on the shelf, patting it gently. These sighs are the fuel for the great clock. They are what keep the gears of silence turning. Without them, the world would be too loud to ever truly rest. Finally, Barnaby feels the weight of sleep pulling at his own eyelids. He walks across the creaking sandalwood floor to his bed of feathers. He takes off his moss slippers, placing them neatly side by side. He pulls his long nightcap over his ears, making sure the humming bell at the end is tucked safely under the blanket so it won't vibrate too loudly. The great clock of silence gives one final deep purr. The moon has reached its highest point in the sky, casting a protective silver glow over the valley. Barnaby curls into a tight, fluffy ball. He thinks of all the people, the animals, and even the trees that are now breathing deeply under the starlight. He feels proud of his work. He is the guardian of the quiet, the keeper of the hush. And as he closes his eyes, his last thought is a wish for you, that your dreams be as light as a feather and as sweet as moonlight tea. The room is dark now, save for the soft blue glow of the hearth. The silence is complete. It is a heavy velvet silence that wraps around everything like a cocoon. You are safe here. You are tucked away in the heart of the clock, where time doesn't matter and only peace remains. Good night, Barnaby. Good night, world. Chapter 2. The Lake of Reflections. The morning of the night, if you can call it that, began with a soft, rhythmic chiming. It wasn't the loud, brassy ring of an alarm clock, but rather the sound of a silver spoon hitting a crystal glass very far away. Barnaby opened one golden eye. His room in the great clock of silence was filled with a pale lavender light. The moon was beginning its descent, but its work was not yet done, and neither was Barnaby's. He climbed out of his bed of feathers, his tiny feet finding the cool, smooth sandalwood floor. Today, or rather tonight, he felt a strange pull in his whiskers, a gentle tugging toward the east, where the misty mountains met the Valley of Peace. In that hidden corner of the world lay the Lake of Reflections. It was a place where thoughts went to cool down, and where the surface of the water was so still it acted like a mirror for the soul. Barnaby put on his traveling cloak, which was a shade darker than his nightcap, the color of a deep, stormy sea, but as soft as a kitten's ear. He grabbed his walking stick, a branch of polished driftwood that hummed whenever it touched the ground. With a final check of the gears in his clock, he stepped out of the tower and onto the silk grass of the valley. The walk to the lake was a symphony of soft textures. The grass brushed against Barnaby's fur like thousands of tiny green fingers, tickling his ankles. As he walked, he passed the slumber bells, tall, drooping flowers that looked like blue trumpets. They didn't make noise. Instead, they exhaled a faint mist that tasted like honey and cold air. Barnaby breathed it in deeply. He wasn't in a hurry. In his world, hurrying was considered a very loud thing to do, and Barnaby preferred to be as quiet as a falling snowflake. As he neared the Lake of Reflections, the air changed. It became heavier, moister, and carried the scent of wet stones and ancient moss. The trees here were different. Their branches didn't reach for the sky, but curved downward, dipping their silver leaves into the dark, glassy water. This was the Lake of Reflections. It wasn't made of ordinary water. It was made of stillness. Barnaby stood at the water's edge. The surface was so flat and perfect that he could see the entire Milky Way reflected in it, looking like a path of diamonds leading into the depths. But something was wrong. In the center of the lake, there was a ripple. It was a small, frantic circle of movement that didn't belong in this temple of silence. "Oh, dear," Barnaby whispered, his voice barely a breath. "A tangled thought." Barnaby sat down on a flat, mossy rock and took out a small wooden flute from his pocket. He didn't blow into it. Instead, he held it up to the air, letting the night wind whistle through the holes. The sound was a low, mournful sigh that seemed to settle on the surface of the lake like a blanket. As the music of the wind played, the ripple in the lake began to slow down. Barnaby watched closely. Inside the ripple, he saw a memory of someone's busy day in the city. He saw a man who had lost his keys, a woman who was worried about a meeting, and a child who couldn't find their favorite toy. These thoughts were like little sparks of static electricity jumping and popping on the surface of the water, refusing to sink into the deep, quiet dark. Barnaby reached into his satchel and pulled out a handful of evening salt, tiny glowing blue crystals he had collected from the caves of echoes. He threw them gently toward the ripple. As the crystals hit the water, they didn't splash. They dissolved into soft, glowing clouds that wrapped around the frantic thoughts. "Let go," Barnaby whispered. "The keys will be found. The meeting will pass. The toy is safe under the bed. Now is the time for nothingness." Slowly, very slowly, the static began to fade. The images of the city and the busy lives below blurred into soft sheets like a painting left out in the rain. The ripples smoothed out, becoming as flat and still as the rest of the lake. The man, the woman, and the child, miles away in their beds, suddenly felt a wave of peace wash over them. They turned on their pillows, let out a long sigh, and fell into a dream of floating on a silver sea. Barnaby watched until the last shimmer disappeared. He felt the lake's gratitude, a cool, refreshing breeze that ruffled his fur and made his bell hum. He stayed there for a long time, watching the stars move across the water. He watched a moon swan glide past, its neck a graceful curve of white light. The swan didn't leave a wake behind it. It moved through the stillness as if it were part of the water itself. He took a small glass vial from his belt and dipped it into the lake, capturing a few drops of the perfectly still water. This was liquid calm. He would use it later to oil the gears of the great clock, ensuring that the silence of the world remained smooth and uninterrupted. As the first hint of blue began to touch the horizon, Barnaby knew it was time to head back. His paws felt heavy and his heart felt full. The journey back through the silk grass was even slower than the journey there. He stopped to listen to a cricket that was playing a very slow, very sleepy cello solo under a mushroom. He stopped to watch a dewdrop grow heavy on a leaf until it finally fell, making a tiny plink sound that echoed through the valley. By the time the great clock of silence came back into view, Barnaby was nearly walking in his sleep. The tower looked like a tall, dark finger pointing toward the fading stars. He climbed the stairs, his slippers making a soft shh sound on the wood. He went straight to the hearth, placed the vial of liquid calm on the mantel, and crawled back into his nest of feathers. The moon gave a final golden flash before disappearing behind the mountains. The sun was coming, but in Barnaby's valley, the light would remain soft and filtered, like the glow through a silk curtain. Barnaby tucked his nose under his paw, his breathing syncing with the slow, deep purr of the clock's gears. The world was quiet, the lake was still, and Barnaby was home. Chapter 3. The Archivist of Starlight. The air in the valley was particularly crisp that evening, smelling of frosted blueberries and cold stone. Barnaby woke up not to the chime of his clock, but to a soft tapping on his circular window. Tap, tap, tap. It was a delicate sound, like a beak clicking against glass. Barnaby rubbed his eyes, adjusted his long nightcap, and waddled to the window. Outside, hovering on silent, enormous wings, was Ophelia. Ophelia was a great snowy owl, but she wasn't quite like the owls you might see in a forest. Her feathers weren't just white, they were translucent, looking as though they were spun from the very mist that clings to the mountaintops at dawn. She wore a pair of small silver-rimmed spectacles perched on her beak, and around her neck hung a satchel filled with glowing parchment. Ophelia was the Archivist of Starlight, the one responsible for making sure every star in the sky shone with the right amount of brightness. "Barnaby," she hooted softly, her voice sounding like the low notes of a wooden flute. "The North Star is flickering. It has caught a chill from a passing comet, and it's feeling rather dim. I need a bit of your golden warmth to cheer it up." Barnaby nodded slowly. He knew exactly what she meant. He went to his cupboard and took out a small heart-shaped tin. Inside was golden warmth, a substance that looked like honey but glowed with the intensity of 1,000 tiny suns. He tucked the tin into his pocket, grabbed his walking stick, and climbed onto Ophelia's back. Her feathers felt like the softest velvet, and they were surprisingly warm. With a powerful but silent beat of her wings, Ophelia took flight. Barnaby held on tight, burying his face in her downy neck as they rose above the great clock of silence. Below them, the valley looked like a patchwork quilt of shadows and silver light. The trees looked like tiny mossy tufts, and the lake of reflections shimmered like a fallen coin. As they climbed higher, the air became thinner and tasted like ozone and peppermint. They were entering the Archive of Starlight, a place in the upper atmosphere where the stars hang low, close enough to touch. Here, the sky wasn't just black, it was a deep, royal purple, pulsing with energy. Thousands of stars hung from invisible threads, swaying gently in the cosmic breeze. "We are almost there," Ophelia whispered, her wings gliding effortlessly through the thin air. They approached a star that looked pale and tired. Instead of a sharp, brilliant white, it was a dull, watery gray. It shivered occasionally, sending cold ripples through the surrounding dark. This was the North Star, the guide for all travelers. If it went out, the world below would feel a little more lost, a little less certain. Ophelia landed on a nearby cloud that was so frozen it felt like a solid marble floor. Barnaby hopped off her back, his moss slippers crunching softly on the ice crystals. He approached the flickering star with great care. He could feel the cold radiating from it, not a biting cold, but a lonely, hollow chill. "Don't you worry, little light," Barnaby said, his voice a soothing hum. He opened the heart-shaped tin, and the golden warmth began to float upward, drawn to the star's fading heat. Barnaby took a small brush made of silver needles and began to paint the warmth onto the star's surface. He worked with the patience of a master artist, his movements slow and rhythmic. Stroke, stroke, stroke. As the golden honey touched the star, a wonderful change began to happen. The dull gray faded away, replaced by a soft, buttery yellow, which then deepened into a brilliant, confident white. The star stopped shivering. It began to hum, a high, pure note that resonated in Barnaby's chest. The warmth spread, and the North Star grew bright enough to cast Barnaby's shadow long across the cloud. Ophelia watched with a proud blink of her amber eyes. "Perfectly done, Barnaby. The travelers will find their way home tonight." But they didn't leave immediately. Ophelia invited Barnaby to sit with her on the edge of the cloud for a while. She opened her satchel and pulled out a map of the constellations. Together, they looked at the sky not as a vast mystery, but as a garden they both tended. They watched a shooting star streak across the horizon, a brief, dazzling flash of blue light. "That one was a wish," Ophelia remarked, adjusting her spectacles. "Someone down there just wished for a very good dream. I must make sure the starlight reaches them." Barnaby nodded, feeling the immense peace of being so high up, so close to the heart of the night. Up here, the noise of the world was non-existent. There was only the sound of the stars humming and the soft rustle of Ophelia's feathers as she preened herself. He felt a deep connection to the owl. They were both guardians of the quiet, working while the rest of the world slept. After a long time, the moon began to tilt toward the horizon, signaling that the deepest part of the night was over. "Time to go back, little friend," Ophelia said. Barnaby climbed back onto her back, feeling a pleasant exhaustion. The flight down was even more peaceful than the flight up. Ophelia didn't flap her wings. She simply glided on the cool night currents, spiraling down toward the valley like a falling leaf. Barnaby watched the great clock grow larger and larger, its blue hearth fire twinkling like a welcoming eye. When they landed back at the tower, Barnaby hopped down and gave Ophelia a gentle pat on her beak. "Thank you, Ophelia," he whispered. Until next time, Barnaby, she hooted before disappearing into the mist, her translucent feathers vanishing like a fading dream. Barnaby climbed the stairs to his room, his heart light. He put the empty tin back in the cupboard and checked the North Star through his window one last time. It was shining brighter than ever, a steady beacon in the purple sky. He climbed into his feather bed, pulled up his heavy quilt, and let out a long, satisfied sigh. Tonight, he hadn't just kept the silence, he had helped the light. And as the gears of the clock purred him to sleep, he knew that the world was safe, guided by a star that was warm once more.